This is a picture that was taken a few years ago with me and my friend Isaac Asimov and his wife and now widow, Dr. Janet Jepson. Isaac was my pal for 40 years. We liked each other a lot. I was going to read you maybe. I thought, I got a couple of letters from him talking about how much he likes my stories and telling me, don't argue with people, don't fight with people. I said, yeah, I'm a great one to tell that to. Isaac died last April. Isaac Asimov was one of the really great men of our time. And this may seem a strange time to do an obituary for him almost a year later, but in fact, not a day should go by that you don't hear the name Isaac Asimov, because he was very important to all of us. And I wrote an homage to him, an obituary to him that I'm not going to read you in its entirety, because I break up, and that's not very becoming on television. But since the Sci-Fi Channel, when it began, dedicated the channel to him, I thought I would read you this little bit that I had in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and it would help us to remember Isaac. Isaac was as much a part of this magazine through the years as paper and ink, and though gone, he remains with us. As he remains with the uncounted thousands of young people who read his essays and stories and went into careers of scientific inquiry, who understood the physical universe because he made it graspable, who became better able to handle their lives because he refused to allow them to accept dogma and bigotry and mendacity in place of common sense and logic. For all of those among you who will mourn him in your own way, the most I have to offer, having been chosen to say goodbye to Isaac in this special venue that he called home for so long, is this one last anecdote of how he viewed himself in his imminent passage. Janet was with him at the end, of course, and his daughter Robin. Janet told me the day before he died that toward the end Isaac had trouble speaking. He could only manage a word or two, and from time to time, then he would say, "I love you," to Janet, and he would smile. But every once in a while, he would murmur, "I want," and he never finished the sentence, just, "I want." And Janet would try to perceive what he needed, and she would say, "A drink of water, Isaac, or something to eat?" And Isaac would look dismayed, annoyed, chagrined that he couldn't put the sentence together, this great thinking machine that at the end could not put a sentence together. And after a moment, he'd let it slide, and he'd forget that he had even spoken, until the last came on the Sunday before he went back into the hospital for the last visit, when he managed to say very clearly, I want Isaac Asimov." And Janet told him he was Isaac Asimov, that he had always been Isaac Asimov, but he looked troubled, because that wasn't what he meant. And then Janet remembered that Isaac had told her some time ago, before he began to slip into abstraction and silence, that if there ever came a time when he didn't know who he was, if there came a time when his mind was not sharp, that he wanted to be let go to sleep quietly, that extraordinary measures should not be taken. And Janet understood that he was saying that he wanted to be Isaac Asimov again. He wanted to be what he was. He wanted to be Isaac Asimov. Then, in that final week before 2:30 a.m. New York time on Monday, April 6th, he was holding Janet's hand, and he looked up at her and he said, very clearly, the last he would ever say, he said, "I am Isaac Asimov." Yes, he was. Yes, indeed he was. I'm a Branch Davidian and I'm all right. I shoot all day and I pray all night. I worship Kura, she's the Lamb of God. CBS calls him a drunken sod. But I'm a Branch Davidian and I'm okay. I shoot all night and I pray all day. Look, here I stand on, what is that, I don't know, the 490th day of the standoff in Waco, Texas. And the FBI is saying they're going to deal with him as soon as they get a message from God. I can just see God now. God hasn't got anything better to do. He hasn't talked to Jerry Falwell in weeks. Jerry's got bad breath. So God goes, "Come on out, David. It's time, David." Nothing happens. I'm talking to a friend of mine the other day, Tom Monteleone, the author, who happens to write these thrillers about sort of millennial, biblical, supernatural horror novels. Well, this is one right here. It's called The Blood of the Lamb. Now, this is not The Silence of the Lambs. That's a different one in which people eat people. This one is The Blood of the Lamb, and it's Tom Monteleone. He's a very fine writer. And he writes these books about the Second Coming and that kind of thing. And we're talking about the Branch Davidians and these nutcases who are, sort of pseudo Jim Jones nutcases in Waco, Texas. And he said, how can they be so crazy? How can they believe that stuff? I said, you're a Catholic, Tom. You believe that they nailed up a Jew and he got down off it and he came out of a cave and he walked on water and he raised the dead. What are you telling me that they're crazy for? Well, folks, I've been too easy with you. I've allowed you to believe a lot of very strange things. I really have to intercede in the name of common sense. Now, for instance, the magazine comes out every quarter called Skeptical Inquirer. It's a very good magazine for you to read. Skeptical Inquirer does articles about those stupid circles that they find in wheat fields in England, which, are made by people doing stupid things in wheat fields. I mean, I guess they have nothing better to do. They have time on their hands. And right here, there's a special report. This special report says 3.7 million Americans have been kidnapped by aliens. They took the reports from all of the various tabloid papers, and they analyzed them. They got a whole mathematical grouping, and they find that if, in fact, as many people as say have been kidnapped by aliens have been, it's 3.7 million Americans. Now, isn't it amazing that of all those 3.7 million Americans, not one of them could put a sentence together properly and grammatically? They always come to some yo-yo out in East Chitley Switch, Georgia, and then they take him up into space and they give him a rectal examination. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were a proctologist, one rectal examination is more than enough to learn everything you need to know about the human anatomy. But these aliens are either perverts or it's not happening. Look, when I do these comments with you, and being a writer who writes science fiction and fantasy and that kind of thing, I try to tell you that there's a big difference between me using a Loch Ness Monster or a Yeti in a story and actually believing that crap. I don't believe that stuff. I'm a human being. I'm a normal person. I believe in Occam's razor. I think there probably is something out there in space, and eventually we'll find it, but I do not think they come here on a regular weekly basis. Here are the 10 great unanswered questions of science. And not one of them is about flying saucers. Now pay close attention. If you can answer any of these 10, we promise you an all-expense-paid tour to the fabulous Art Deco studios of Sci-Fi Buzz. You'll love it. It's fabulous. It's the size of the Taj Mahal. The 10 great unanswered questions of science from Discover Magazine, November 1992. Number 1, how big is the universe? 2, does chaos rule the cosmos? Number 3, what drives climate? Number 4, how did life start? 5, is anyone out there? 6, how does a single cell become a whole body? 7, what is consciousness? 8, who peopled the planet? 9, how many people can Earth hold? And 10, can we wipe out disease? Now, these are great mysteries. You don't really need to believe crazy stuff, like James Dean is not actually dead, but living hideously deformed in a mental institution in Indiana, or that Elvis Presley makes regular visits to 7-Elevens. You don't have to believe that stuff. Trust me on this. I talk to God regularly. She tells me that's wrong. Read the second ethology, ethnocentricity. Now, get this. The dictionary says ethnocentrism is a belief in the superiority of one's own ethnic group. And this is good, under xenophobia, be with you in a moment here, xenophobe is a person unduly fearful or contemptuous of strangers or foreigners, especially as reflected in his political or cultural views. Now, I know there may be a few of you out there saying, why is this idiot reading to me from the dictionary? That's because I want you to understand the nature of what it is I'm going to say to you, because I'm going to use the words xenophobia and ethnocentrism. And I'm going to use them in reference to American publishers, particularly American publishers of science fiction, who publish mostly American science fiction writers. Occasionally they publish British science fiction writers, but basically they publish Americans. And they have an absolute aversion to translating from other languages the famous and the eloquent and the excellent writers who write science fiction and many other things into English so that you can read them. They would much prefer to sell you endless Star Trek novels, endless trilogies about furry, fuzzy creatures on mythical quests for rings or swords or rectal suppositories or whatever it is those fuzzy little things are always going for. But they won't bother to translate for you the writings of some famous writers in Japan or in France, or in Sweden. I mean, even Australia is as alien to them as the dark side of the moon. Now, I have a small list here, and I brought it with me so that I could read you some names, so that if you happen to see any of these people's names, you'll look them up. Because American publishers are too busy publishing trash to really take any chances. It's a market-driven genre, and they want more stories that have fantasy trilogy material, and they don't really want to go for anything dangerous. I would recommend to you, for instance, the great Swedish fantasist Sven-Christer Svan. In Sweden, there's also the work of Bertil Martinsen. There are two great fantasists who work you don't even know because they don't bother to translate them into English. In Argentina, Luisa Valenzuela, although she has been translated into English, you can reach her and you can find her stuff if you want. In Japan, if you haven't read the work of Kobo Abe, work like The Boxman and Inner Ice Age 4, you just haven't read. And in Australia, there are people like Terry Dowling and Lucy Sussex, Sean McMullen, Peter Carey, Russell Blackford, Greg Egan, Leanne Fromm. These are just a few of the names that you're not getting because of the ethnocentricity of American publishers. And when they award the Nobel Prize, and they give it to some writer you've never heard of from Zamboanga or New Zealand, you say, who the hell ever heard of him? Well, the rest of the world has heard of him, or her, but you haven't, because you're being denied all of these great works, because all they want is to give you jello. They want to give you mush. You got to resist that. You got to say, I don't want any more mush. No more dopey trilogies about fuzzy-footed creatures. Hello there. You know, in the old days when science fiction was a bastard genre and people were not allowed to read it out in public, I mean, you could read porn magazines out in public, but you couldn't read science fiction magazines. People would read them inside a copy of the National Geographic. One of the dodges that they used to make it seem as if science fiction was really worthwhile was that it predicted the future. Yes, we predict the future. Why, Jules Verne predicted the submarine. Why, H.G. Wells predicted the time machine. Well, that, of course, was nonsense. Science fiction no more predicts the future than you do. But with hundreds of writers writing at all times and predicting every damn thing there was to predict, eventually they would hit a few things right. It's amazing the things they never did hit right. Even Bob Heinlein, Robert Heinlein, the great seer of the future, never understood that it would be the government that would be sending rockets to the moon. He always thought it was going to be private industry. Well, it wasn't. It was always the government. That is until now. I hold in my hands a press release. This is called a press release. I have scraped it very diligently so that the horse manure and cow flop that's on it usually is not here, and I'm able to hold it without doing myself any great damage. This is a press release from Columbia Pictures. NASA and a consortium of corporations sponsoring the first commercial space mission in U.S. history have chosen Columbia Pictures and its action-adventure fantasy film, The Last Action Hero, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, to be the first advertiser in space. On the main fuselage of the rocket, there will be an advertisement for The Last Action Hero. I really hate giving them any promotion like this. And on the payload, which will orbit the Earth for a minimum of 2 years, conducting microgravity experiments, this moron ad for this dopey movie will be circling the Earth. Can't you say, honey, let's go out tonight with the telescope and take a look at Arnold's ad again? Well, the president of Space Marketing, Inc., do you love that? Space Marketing, Inc., it's worthy of Frederick Pohl and C.M. Kornblum, said, after reviewing many possible promotional partners for this historical event, Columbia Pictures was chosen for their ingenious creativity that represents the same goals as the American space program. I didn't realize that the American space program's goal was to make money for Columbia Pictures and dopey action-adventure movies and make Arnold Schwarzenegger even more money. I don't know why it bothers me. I mean, it's basically a pretty stupid thing, this press release. I suppose it's because here we are down here on this mud ball, looking up at the stars, maybe the last 40, 50 years, actually thinking we're going to reach them someday and hoping that we're a noble enough species to do it. And when we get the chance, we turn it into the same kind of cheap, sleazy advertising medium as everything else on the planet. Boy, does that make me unhappy. Does that make you unhappy?
In the 25 years since Stanley Kubrick's benchmark film 2001, A Space Odyssey came out, Sci-Fi Buzz commentator Harlan Ellison says many film and TV producers he knows in Hollywood haven't learned a thing. they're still wooden heads when it comes to space.
It's 25 years since 2001 came out. 2001, 25 years. Do you remember when you saw it at the Cinerama Dome? Remember how bored you were? I remember how bored you were. You said to me, this is a very long film. Well, yes, I know, of course, that they cut it. They chopped down the running around the centrifuge spaceship there thing. I know they cut down the pavane, the stately pavane of the spaceship at the beginning with the Blue Danube. I know they cut all that down. But at first, every critic in the country hated it. Everybody thought it was dopey. Everybody thought it was stupid. It was very weird. Then all of a sudden, every acid head in the world loved it and went there for the trip, and word of mouth, and boom, now it's a classic. Gaze with me into the vastness of space. See up there? Up there, there is no sound in space. It's vacuum. That means no air. That means they can't see any laser beams, because there ain't no dust in the air. It really is a classic, particularly when you look at what's come since, and when you realize that nobody bothered to learn any of the lessons that Kubrick taught them. I mean, we still have explosions in space. We still have rocket ships that act like they were Focke-Wulfs and Fokkers and Stukas and Japanese Zeros. I'm telling you, they didn't learn the lessons of that movie. We can still hear crashes and bashes. Kubrick was an artist. Kubrick was a cinematic genius, as opposed to, well, I don't know, the people who did Buck Rogers or the people who did Battleship Galaxidiv. I mean, these are all just imitations, I guess, of Star Wars. And I get very annoyed. George Lucas is a lovely man. You remember the conversation I had with George? And I said to him, George, how could you make a film like this and spend all this money and still have explosions in space that we hear? Everybody knows it's a vacuum in space. How can you teach kids stupid science like this? Aren't we stupid enough? And George said, we didn't want to do it, but people expect it. People expect it? What, do they think we're made of wood? Nice seeing you, Dave. Take care of yourself.
You know, I seldom talk about myself personally. I'm one of those self-effacing kind of guys. But I thought I would tell you about my wife. My wife, Susan, is a strange creature who fell from the moon. She murdered her first husband to gain control of his steamship line. I married her 7 years ago. We actually lived in sin for a year. Well, we didn't actually live in sin because, as it is well known, I am a person with no sex organs. This is not my fault. It was very cold one day in New York. I think it was, minus 20 below zero, something like that, and I had an accident. My wife has threatened to leave me if I continue doing these and if I keep talking about science fiction. But I have to eventually talk about women. I have to do it. I have to talk about women in science fiction. And I was originally going to do this kind of thing, they said, well, aren't you going to be a little controversial? I was going to say, ain't there too many broads writing in science fiction at the moment? And they said, well, you can't say a thing like that. I said, what part of that bothered you? Well, I was thinking about women in science fiction. Now, when I came into this vaunted field, which was in the early 50s, there were only 3 or 4 women who were writing science fiction, maybe 5, and all of them were writing under names that were either patently man's names, like Andre Norton, who was, of course, Mary Alice Norton writing, or C.L. Moore under initials, and that was Catherine L. Moore. And they were brilliant writers. A woman named Lee Brackett, and I always thought, like the knee-jerk liberal moron that I am, that the more women we had in the field, the better it would be, because they would bring to the genre a sensibility, a view, a worldview that we as men did not have. We simply didn't have. And so along about the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, maybe middle 60s, I don't know, something like that, there started to be some enormous breakthroughs. There were some astonishing women writers. Astonishing writers who happened to be women. Ursula Le Guin, Joanna Russ, Vonda McIntyre, Carolyn Cherry, Kate Wilhelm was doing important things at that time. I got a little list here so I wouldn't forget. And we thought, now it's going to happen. And in fact, a great many women ran through that rip in the membrane that had been caused by brilliant writing of Ursula's and Joanna's. And they were writing books that were astonishing, dealing with very difficult subjects. And now we come to 1993, where exactly half of the final nominees on the ballot for the Nebula are women. Half of them, 50%. Not 42% or 37%, or we're giving a nod to women by having 6 on there. Fully half, and maybe more. One of them is initials I've never heard of, S.N. Dyer. I don't know that writer, so it may be a man or a woman. But at least 50% of the writers on here for the final ballot for the Nebula are women. And some of them are brilliant writers. Connie Willis is writing some of the best stuff that's ever been written in the field. And Karen Joy Fowler is absolutely astonishing. But when I go to the newsstand, and I go to the bookstore, and I look at the books, what I see are these idiot trilogies written. They start off being written by Anne McCaffrey with Mercedes Lackey. Then Mercedes Lackey becomes a big name, so it's Mercedes Lackey and Elizabeth Moon or whoever. And then Elizabeth Moon becomes a big name, and it's Elizabeth Moon and Ellen Dwan, and then it's Ellen Dwan as a, and they go on and on and on. They're fantasy, I suppose, but they're the kind of fantasy that could be written by anybody. Male, female, neuter, alien, me. With the exception of the Karen Joy Fowlers and the Connie Willises and the Pam Sargents who are writing, most of these novels are just awful, whether they're men or they're women. But like the knee-jerk liberal idiot that I am, I expected better of women, that if they were given the opportunity, they wouldn't repeat the same stupid errors that us guys did. At least, my wife keeps telling me that's the case.
Our resident commentator on the passing scene is award-winning author Harlan Ellison. When we call him award-winning, that's an understatement. Harlan has won more awards for his 58 books, more than 1,100 stories, articles, essays, and columns than any other living fantasist. His film criticism has been appearing for the last 8 years in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and like our commentaries here, is called Harlan Ellison's Watching.
One of the things that gets me crazy, and it gets every writer crazy, whether they're in this field or any other genre, is getting one of these letters from somebody in East Chittling Switch, Georgia, or some other center of great wisdom, saying, well, I know you're a great writer, and I just love your works, but I can't find any of your books on the newsstand. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why, dummy. You also can't find Joseph Conrad's books, or Edith Wharton's books, or Mark Twain's books. That's because this is a market-driven industry. If any part of that phrase confuses you, turn to the person next to you and say, what means that, market-driven? What it means is that the ad men and the marketing people and the advertising people tell you what will go and what will sell and what will not sell. Now, if I have a book come out today, a paperback, and it goes on sale, and they put it in the 7-Eleven spinner racks, right? Now, first of all, the top pockets of those 7-Eleven spinner racks are purchased by the big paperback houses. We're talking Pocket Books and New American Library, which is Signet Books, and Bantam and Dell. And that means that if you're in one of the lesser companies, you are stuck in one of the lower pockets. Now, you know yourself, when you go into one of those 7-Elevens or some other fast shopping place, you spin the rack and you look at what you can see. You do not bend down, because if you bend down, 27 people are going to trip over you and dump their Slurpees all over you. So that means that if you got a book in one of those bottom pockets, forget it. You are necky hokey, no price. You can't sell the book. But let's say that the book does get up into one of those upper pockets. How long does it stay there? What is that? A month? What, you said, what, 6 weeks? And you over there sitting on the sofa stuffing your face with Twinkies. What'd you say? What, a week? No. What you've got is 4 days. 4 days before they bring in the next batch of books. In the course of a month, paperback publishers will publish something like 2,000 different titles. Now that means that the only ones that are going to get really put on the top are Danielle Steele and Stephen King and Louis L'Amour when he was alive, and whoever is this month's flavor of the month, you know, like John Grisham. And that means that everybody else who is called mid-list gets shoved to the bottom. Now that's the ideal situation. You want to know how long it is in the biggest newsstand in America? First of all, do you know where the biggest newsstand in America is? No. Good guess, but no. I'll tell you where it is. It's at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. They have the largest newsstands in the world there. In those satellites, they sell more paperbacks per annum than entire cities, entire states. And you know how long you've got there to make it? How long do you say? What? 1 day? 2 days? 5 days? No. You got 3 hours. One day I was waiting for a plane. I was transferring heaven knows where. And I met the guy who comes around with the little cart. And he's dragging the slab cart behind him that's got all the boxes of books. And I'm watching him fill the pockets in these newsstands in the different satellites. And I said, how long can you tell when a book sells there? He says, you got 3 hours. He will load up a pocket. He'll put 4 of everything. And then he will go away. His rounds around all of the satellites of O'Hare Airport take him 3 hours. When he comes back, If he put up 6 copies of my book and there are 4 still there, and he put up 13 copies of the Stephen King book and there's 1 there, out come my 4 and in go 13 more of Stephen's books. Now, that's why you can't find any of my books. I got 59 books. None of them are in print at the moment. And I'm not the only one.
Hello, brethren and sistren. The sermon for today. Actually, it's not a sermon for today. Actually, this is a follow-up to one of the commentaries I did several weeks ago. I'm sort of answering my mail here. When I did the piece on women writing in science fiction, and I named a lot of writers, and I thought I was going to get pilloried. But I got a letter, and I can't show you the letter, because if I show you the letter, you'll know who wrote it. And that would be betraying the trust of the person who sent it to me. But I've used yellow highlighter here, and I think I've got the salient parts, and I'd like to read you what this writer, a woman, wrote to me. A woman who is a writer and an anthologist, very well known, very highly respected. And she was talking about the commentary that I did about women writing in science fiction. She wrote, "Dear Harlan, I was in the kitchen washing dishes a short while ago when somebody came in to tell me that the television was about to emit something interesting. I asked the obvious question, and he said he was watching Sci-Fi Buzz, and Harlan Ellison's going to talk about women, SF, and fantasy writers. Well, he asked me what had made, I came rushing in. He asked me what had made me so eager and curious. I replied that I wondered if you were going to name names, and he asked for further explanation. I explained that just the weekend previous, and here she names 3 other writers, 3 other women writers of extraordinary award-winning quality, and she had gone on at great length, but in private, about the sad state of SF and fantasy due to the proliferation of poorly written books by women who clearly didn't know better about anything from men to sentence construction. We," and she names the women again, "agreed that the situation wouldn't get better until we stopped being polite to each other just because we were all women, but none of us was ready to name names in public." She goes on and she says some more things, and then she says, "Then you came through with vintage Ellison, sharp, precise, and naming names. May the gods, whoever and wherever they are, smile upon you for once again speaking the truth. I don't know if you consider me with the sheep or the goats, but I think the genre is being inundated with waves of pseudo-feminist fantasy trash, one damn thing after another, plots, cardboard characters, politically correct and recycled, and facile resolutions the Brothers Grimm would laugh out of fairy tale heaven. And a lot of this trash is being typed or keyed, but definitely not written, by pairs of women." I take this letter as a great badge of honor. This is a fine writer who sent me this. From time to time, I'll update you. The only other thing I need to update you with are these 2 small items. One of them has to do with the Nebula ballot. Remember I said it was exactly 50% women? I was wrong. It was over 50%. There was a name I did not know, S.N. Dyer, D-Y-E-R. Well, it turns out S.N. Dyer is a pseudonym, and it is for a woman. I won't give you her real name, although she does write under that name because she hasn't given me permission to. But that means that the Nebula ballot this year was 60% women instead of 50. The other thing you need to be updated on to know exactly where I stand so you won't think I have any hidden agenda, on June 14th, I started work as the conceptual consultant on the forthcoming television series Babylon 5. If I now say anything bad about Star Trek or Deep Space Nine or anything like that, you'll know that I possibly have a secret agenda, so you can discount anything I say. Oh, to tell the truth. Ah, honor. Ah, money. Ah, time. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, as you can see, if you look closely at my tie, friends, this is the Tasmanian Devil. This is a microphone. Ignore it. But the Tasmanian Devil is on my tie because I'm going to rant and rave and scream. I seldom do that, as you know. I'm a person of quiet demeanor, but I feel it is time to talk about the impending implosion in the science fiction market. Now, a few years back, when there was a huge horror genre, and there were 256,414 horror novels being published every month, all of which were sort of sickly clones of Stephen King's books or Dean Koontz's books, I predicted in my column, Harlan Ellison's Watching, after which these commentaries are named, in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, I indicated that there was going to be a terrific implosion, that the field could not support all of that bad writing and all of those writers writing vampire stuff. I mean, I got to be very candid with you. Vampires bore the tuchus off me. I don't understand. I mean, once you suck the neck, what is there left to tell the story about? In any case, some people like reading about vampires. Let them go. They also like chafed thighs. This is not my problem. I said the field was going to implode and that a lot of people were going to find themselves in the water as the boat sank. That only those few writers who were really and truly good writers would be able to survive, would be able to float, would be able to swim away, and most of the others would have to, if they wanted to survive, start converting over to psychological novels, novels of terror, mysteries, or combinations thereof. Well, I was roundly pilloried. One agent, a very nice young woman, but a little self-serving, said, "What do you mean by that? I just sold a book for $1,500 to Zebra Paperbacks." Folks, my first novel back in 1955, 56, I got $1,500. So that was no big deal in 1992 or whatever year it was. And as you can see now, there's almost no horror line left. When you go into one of the big bookstores. There are a lot of books that look like it. They're being converted over. The only real line that's left is Abyss Books, which is published by Dell. Well, the same thing is about to happen in science fiction. Yes, yes, it's finally come to pass. Sodom and Gomorrah are about to fall. A lot of people who have been writing, how shall I put it delicately, caca, are about to find themselves in the water with no boat. Even people like Piers Anthony and Jack Chalker, who have made a fortune with these endless trilogies and tetralogies and series after series after series, even they are not getting the kind of money that they got just a few years ago. Everybody is scampering and scrabbling for a new birth. And what's happening is a major weeding out process. Yes, I am ranting. Yes, I am raving. Yes, I am the Tasmanian devil telling you that all of this crap writing that has butchered our field and has made it the lowest possible level of reading in the last 5-10 years is about to be weeded out. A great many people are going to find themselves unemployed. But this is good for humanity, because now perhaps they will go take up electrical wiring, they'll get a job as a plumber, and as I have said many, many times, when your toilet overflows, you don't need Dostoevsky coming to your house. Mark my words.
Represent the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild. This is the Gnome King of Oz. This is Tick-Tock of Oz. This here is the Scarecrow of Oz, and you know, of course, the Tin Woodman of Oz. Now, I'm standing here in front of part of my Oz collection. Now, the reason I'm standing in front of it is to talk to all the parents out there whose children have become hopeless dope addicts, who have piled up their cars doing 180 miles an hour while drinking beer, or who have picked up some hideous alien disease. Part of the problem for you folks is that you're allowing television to be your babysitter. You talk about the evil and the violence on television. Well, that's why the off switch is there. But you're too lazy to go and talk to your kids. So what I'm going to try to do here today is suggest an alternative. I don't care how old your kids are, whether they're 2 years old, 5 years old, 12, 15, or 17. You sit them down, or possibly nail them to the chair if they move too fast, and you read them the Oz books. One after another, you read them the Oz books. This is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This is actually a leather-bound edition of it. This is not the original. I could not afford the original. But it's a wonderful book with all of the original illustrations by W.W. Denslow in it. And all the rest of these are Oz books. All of these and all of these. And there are new ones being written all the time. There were a whole group of them that were written by a woman named Ruth Plumley Thompson. Many of them are out in paperback. And they're available to you. And so you can even read about Jack Pumpkinhead of Oz right here. And I'll tell you why it's a good idea. Not only are these books wholesome, not only do they teach proper values, not the kind of bogus family values that the Republican Party tried to sell us, but really, come with me, come this way, really terrific family values. The kind of family values that I think they're going to try to instill in the new Oz theme park that is proposed in Emporia, Kansas. This is an artist's conception of the Emerald City that was done for the Landmark Corporation. They're the people who did the Back to the Future ride over at Universal Studios. And they are talking about having an Oz land, an Oz theme park in Emporia, Kansas. And you could take your kids there. Either way, imagination is what we're talking about. The harsh realities of life that kids have to face every day are not going to go away. They need your attention, and they cannot be permitted to be turned over to the tube for education. The tube is not Oz. The tube is hell.